As you've listened to our lectures, I'm sure you've wondered about how nanotechnology discoveries are actually made and how the research gets done. We decided to devote this lecture to telling you about the research process in nanotechnology so that you have a clearer idea about what kinds of people are involved, how it's funded, and how we move discoveries out of research labs and into commercial products. There are thousands of academic labs across the world that are working on nanotechnology-related projects, and hundreds more research labs at companies, government labs, and research institutes. This is a very large community of people, all working towards realizing the applications of nanotechnology that we've discussed in this course. Now, you might wonder what kind of training is required for nanotechnology researchers. Well, you'll find that almost anything goes. People with some type of background in almost any area of basic science can find a place on a nanotechnology research team and make an important contribution. What's really unique about the teams that work on nanotechnology research is that they're highly interdisciplinary. In order to move projects forward, it's often necessary to have people with chemistry, physics, and biology in their background. And it's also important to have people with engineering training involved. The chemists can help us generate new materials, the physicists can help us understand the properties of new materials, and biologists can help us put biomolecules and nanomaterials together. The engineers help us turn basic discoveries into devices, an important step in getting new science turned into solutions for medicine, computing, or energy. To make this more tangible for you, I thought I would introduce you to some of the members of my research group so that you can get an idea of how people work together. I serve as the principal investigator, leading a team of about 20 researchers from a variety of different backgrounds. We are a cross-faculty group, and we draw people from the Faculty of Medicine, Faculty of Pharmacy, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and the Faculty of Engineering. And in addition to having people with different backgrounds, people come into the group and join the team at a variety of levels. So some are graduate students earning a master's or a PhD degree. Some are postdoctoral researchers who are getting more experience after their PhD. And then some of our team members join us as research associates after getting their undergraduate degree. One of my projects focuses on the development of a new type of DNA-modified quantum dot that can form really neat three-dimensional networks. The lead on this project is Paul Lee. Paul is a chemist, and he got his PhD at Caltech. He actually worked in the same lab that I did as a graduate student. And Paul has really helped us perfect the chemistry that makes our materials functional and highly luminescent. So you'll see Paul holding a tube of material that's really glowing, and it's glowing so brightly because of all the chemistry that he's used to optimize it. And so Paul's deep expertise in understanding chemical reactions makes all the difference here. Now, Paul works closely with a master's student named Davis Holmes. Davis has an undergraduate degree in engineering physics. And so he comes at the same project from a totally different perspective. Davis can help us think about the behavior of the quantum dots we make and why their electronic properties change in the presence of DNA. And having someone with this skill set on the project is really critical so that we understand how to give our quantum dots the highest level of performance possible. As you know, we also work on making nanomaterials-based sensor chips in my lab. And here we also need lots of different kinds of expertise. This is Mario Moscovici, and Mario is a master's student with a mechanical engineering background. Mario is working on developing a device that will capture circulating tumor cells out of blood samples for early cancer detection. His mechanical engineering experience helped us figure out how to flow solutions around our chips, and this is a really essential capability. We also need biology and biochemistry expertise on this project in order to understand how to work with the DNA and RNA molecules that we're trying to sense. This is Sean Guo. Sean has an undergraduate degree in biochemistry, and he's now a master's student with us. And he is working on getting our chips to detect viruses. So Sean came in with the expertise to help us with the biochemical aspects of this project, but as you can see, he now works with pretty sophisticated electronic equipment. This is a workstation where Sean is figuring out how to break up the viral particles with an electric field so that we can analyze them. So Sean has really had to stretch beyond what he learned as a graduate student and actually learn some electrical engineering. And this is very typical for members of the nanotechnology team. They're always learning something new. Alex Zaragoza brings a background in biology to our chip sensor project. Alex has an understanding of the markers within cells that can tell us that a cell is cancerous. He's engineering a chip to make it pick up on leukemia biomarkers. And since he's been with us, he's learned all kinds of things outside of the biology that he came in with. So he's learned aspects of electrochemistry, chip engineering, bioanalysis, all new skills. And you heard in a previous lecture about the results of his work, a really powerful new diagnostic tool for leukemia. Now, on the chemistry side of the project, we have Brian Lamb, who is working on a PhD in chemistry. Brian is really good at developing new types of materials chemistry. Here, he's sitting at our scanning electron microscope, and he's imaging one of the chips he made. And while he waits for the image to come up, he's actually giving Davis Holmes a tutorial on how SEM works. This is a common occurrence on our team. One member with a certain expertise can help another fill the gaps in their background. And this is one of the ways that these team members are able to learn about all of the different areas that are involved in nanotechnology by educating one another. Now you can see Brian zooming in on the surface of the chip. You can see the nanomaterials he deposited on the chip now coming into focus in real time. And SEM is just one of the techniques that Brian uses every day. He moves back and forth between our clean room where he fabricates devices, sometimes over to our workstation where he makes DNA molecules, then he does some electrochemical measurements, and it just goes on and on. Nanotechnology researchers have to be incredibly versatile. They're always changing gears, and they usually never do the same thing 2 days in a row. So now I think you can see that people that work on these types of nanotechnology teams, they all have their own specialization. But at the same time, they really have to become broader and broader as they work. And this is a very unique aspect of nanotechnology research. The team members need to be willing to be very versatile, go back and forth between different techniques, and they're constantly teaching themselves something new. And that's quite different from more traditional areas of science, where you typically learn one thing really deeply, and that's your area of specialization. Nanotechnology researchers tend to be much, much broader, and they're exposed to all sorts of things during their careers. And I think this is why many are attracted to the field. It has a unique set of challenges that really appeal to people that are curious and like learning new things. Now, you might wonder, how do we pay all these people, and how do we buy all of the instrumentation that you've seen? Well, we get our funding from a variety of sources: the government, private foundations, and companies. In Canada, we get funding from both the provincial government and the federal government. In the United States, most of the funding comes from the federal government. A healthy budget for a group of about 20 is close to $1 million a year, and the money gets split pretty evenly between personnel costs and supplies and equipment. Nanotechnology research is actually a bit more expensive than other types of scientific research. We need lots of sophisticated equipment, and our teams are big because we need so many different types of expertise. It's a pretty major undertaking, actually, to raise this kind of money. And getting money from the government, whether it be the National Institute of Health, the National Science Foundation, or the Department of Defense, involves writing very long, detailed proposals that describe a project we want to work on. And once we assemble the proposal and send it off, it undergoes very rigorous peer review. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon for a proposal to get turned down several times before it gets funded, so we also spend quite a bit of time iterating on and improving proposals. But the system really works in that it prioritizes high-quality, high-impact research. Now, what are the tangible outcomes that come from this kind of investment? Well, we disseminate the results of research in many different ways. And then the ways the results get used differ depending on what the application is. To get the word out about what we've discovered, we write papers and patents, and we attend conferences where new results get reported. Now, if the research that we do is quite basic in nature, like work done to develop a new material or imaging technique, the outcomes may take a while to materialize. Basic research serves as the foundation for more applied research focused on different applications. So very often more follow-up work is needed before anything can be brought to the marketplace or commercialized. But basic research is really important. This is where the most game-changing discoveries are often made. And that's because it's usually curiosity-driven, and it can take a project in unexpected directions. So, for example, a few years ago, my group started working on a project where we were studying some very basic materials that were based on peptides. And when we started, we were mainly just curious about what the properties of the materials would be, and we didn't really have any particular application in mind. But after working with them for a few years, we've learned how to make them into powerful drug delivery agents. And we found that they can attack even the most resistant cancer cells. So clearly, it's really important for researchers to pursue sound, basic ideas, even if the immediate impact is not clear. Now, for nanotechnology research that is more applied, a few different things can happen. If patents were generated from the work, an existing company may be interested in licensing them. They would then turn the research into a product, and once it's commercialized, they would pay the inventors and the universities where the patents were generated a royalty. And this very often happens when new drugs are created. It takes lots of money to develop drugs and put them through FDA trials. We've talked a little bit about that. And so typically those patents are licensed by companies with pretty deep pockets so that they can take it all the way through all of the clinical trials that are needed. Now, for certain types of inventions, it actually makes more sense for a new company to be created. We refer to these companies as spin-offs or startups. And what is this the best route? Well, in some industries, and the diagnostics industry is one example, a new technology actually needs to be very mature before it can be licensed. But it's not really possible to do the kind of work that is needed to mature a technology to this stage in a university lab. It needs to be done in a regulated environment so that the technology can get FDA approval eventually. And the optimization that needs to be done is not really suitable for students earning a degree. So here, if a company can be created and funded, it's a good way to get a technology to market. Now, how do you fund a company to take those next steps? Well, there are many different channels, but one of the best for nanotechnology research is raising venture capital. The advantage of working with venture capitalists and giving them equity in a company in return for an investment is that in addition to getting their money, you also get to access their network of contacts and their experience that they've gotten working with other companies. But it's not easy. The amount of venture capital is shrinking, and it's becoming more and more competitive to raise this kind of money. I've actually been involved with 2 startup companies. One that I co-founded after my PhD studies was called Genome Sciences. This company was set up in 2000, right when the idea of using genomics for medicine was getting really hot. We developed a variety of tools for genetic analysis and eventually commercialized a series of tests for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. This company was backed by a variety of venture capitalists, and it was eventually sold for $250 million in 2005. Ted Sargent and I just recently co-founded a company called Exogenic. Exogenic is commercializing a chip-based diagnostic technology that our groups co-developed. And Exogenic will produce a variety of tests that will enable more rapid diagnosis of infectious disease. It's early days at Exogenic, so I can't tell you where the products will hit the markets, but we hope to be successful with getting our nanomaterials-based chips commercialized quickly. So these are just 2 examples from my own experience of how academic nanomaterials research can get commercialized. I think they're pretty representative, though, of how discoveries move out of academic labs and eventually are turned into products. So now I'm going to hand things over to Ted, who will tell you about a few experiences he's had commercializing nanotechnology research, and he'll also tell you about some other aspects of how nanotechnology research gets done.
Just like Shana, I've been very interested in commercializing the fruits of research that happen within my group at the University of Toronto. And I've gotten to do that in the last couple of years. It's been incredibly exciting. You know, well before we started this company, which is called Envisage, for about 4 years leading up to that, I've been working in the field of colloidal quantum dots, which we've spoken about in this course earlier. And what's so exciting about these materials is twofold. First, that you can synthesize them in solution, and so you can simply coat them onto things. You can essentially make a paintable or a sprayable semiconductor. And that in addition to that, you can tune them. We've talked about the quantum size effect, the fact that you have a material that you can really customize towards certain applications. And we've been working with them for a while, and really what we were trying to do is to understand what's the potential of these materials. There's various ways you could see using them in light emission, which is very relevant to displays, or in energy capture, very relevant to solar energy harvesting. But we ended up discovering that our devices made extremely good photodetectors, extremely sensitive detectors for light. And that, of course, turned out to be very useful when you combine it with the spectral tunability of these materials, the fact that we could engineer a set of materials such that they were visible light sensors, very useful in the visible imaging that we all do every day. But we could also engineer them to see in the infrared, to see a wavelength that we can't see with our own eyes, and therefore potentially to create an image sensor that gave entirely new capabilities that went beyond conventional vision and imaging. And so in about 2005, we made the discovery that it was possible to make these very, very sensitive photodetectors, and I had always wanted to commercialize some of the fruits of my research. I was really looking for a time when we said, wow, we've got something that nobody else has. We got there first, we invented it, we patented it, and we've got a really special advantage in going out there and building a company, building products, taking them all the way to the market. And so that's what we did in 2005, 2006. We managed to attract investors into Envisage. In the past couple of years, we've built prototypes that improve the capability of these materials to enhance the sensitivity of image sensors, the kinds of image sensors that are inside your cell phone, inside your mobile phone. We've shown that it enhances them in many ways. It allows us to take them out into spectral regimes that have previously been unheralded when silicon was the basis for image sensing. It's allowed us to put new functions into these chips. Because of the way silicon chips work, where they utilize silicon for the light sensing function, as well as for the electronics that drives the chip, they've been limited in how complex they could make the electronics because real estate was scarce since they were sharing it between the light sensing and the circuit function. We realized within Envisage, once we brought together a team of amazing circuit designers and experts in material science, we realized that we were able to break those compromises and make image sensor circuits that deliver new functions, like a true electronic shutter that gets rid of the jitter that you see in cameras today. And so this has been a very exciting part of the work, and it's been incredibly gratifying to see that we can do more than just build materials, build devices that evince the potential of work on the nanoscale, and that we've actually been able to turn them into real prototypes, ultimately into products that evince what we're talking about when we talk about how excited we are about engineering at the nanoscale. You know, I've actually learned a lot, not just about commercialization, but also about nanotechnology through this experience in nanotechnology commercialization. So, for example, you might think with these remarkable materials, with these very special properties, that all these exotic ideas would have to mean high cost. But in fact, the work that we do in Shana's commercial activities as well are all about using nanomaterials for these very specific purposes where they're really needed in order to achieve our technical objectives, but in a way that doesn't have to mean high cost. In fact, it can mean low cost, and it has in both of our cases. So it doesn't have to be a compromise, if you like. We can have low cost and high performance simultaneously. Another thing that I've learned through the course of this, I had this idea before getting the company going, but this became so much more tangible as we built it, that nanotechnology doesn't have to stand alone. We don't have to be interested in nanoparticles or nanotubes for their own sake or in isolation, but that it can be very compelling to take a new technology, a new capability, and marry it with an established one. So in the case of Envisage, it's that we're taking a new light sensing capability and we're putting it onto the platform of microelectronics, a platform that has been developed, rendered robust, rendered cost-effective, rendered manufacturable over decades. And it's really a synergy between this new element that the nanomaterials bring, but this very sound and stable platform of microelectronics that is enabled to build something rapidly that's been very compelling. I thought I'd tell a couple of stories about 3 examples of people that have inspired me in the field. People who are, they're thought leaders, they've made huge technical and scientific contributions, but I think it's often in the case for the people one really admires, they even go beyond that as well. So my first example is that of Paul Weiss. And Paul fairly recently moved from Penn State to UCLA, where he directs the California Nanosciences Institute. And Paul does some incredibly beautiful science, a science that pertains to really gaining an atom-scale understanding and control over the properties of materials. He's very talented in the use of scanning tunneling microscopes to do this. In fact, he notes that one of the almost magical elements of the scanning tunneling microscope is that you can both sense and you can also move matter. You can displace atoms. You can control where they end up using your scanning tunneling microscope. It's a very powerful tool. And what I find so compelling about the way Paul does science is that he really insists that when it gets interesting is when he's exploring phenomena, ground rules, limits that are different. They're really distinct as a result of being at the nanoscale. And so his curiosity really focuses on understanding what it is about engineering or doing science at the nanoscale that confers entirely new properties. Another thing about Paul that's so remarkable is that with a huge group, a very compelling program that's known internationally, at the same time he took it upon himself to found a new journal for the dissemination of the very best nanotechnology research. And it's known as ACS Nano. ACS is the American Chemical Society, which publishes a lot of the top journals in the field. This is a new journal that Paul was involved in from the very beginning. And academics, and especially in the field of nanotechnology, but academics generally, they're always looking out for the very strongest journal, the one with a great reputation, one where by being able to publish in one of these journals, the glory of that journal is kind of showering down on the scientists for their capacity to publish in such a great venue. And so it's very difficult to build a journal from scratch. In fact, your reach, the extent to which people notice and cite the works in it is inevitably going to be less when you get it going. Well, Paul took what I thought was a very innovative approach. First, right when we were getting into social networking and social media, Paul started to use the tools of disseminating information in a very accessible way over the internet. In fact, as cute as the little video clips that he did were called NanoTube, in which you could watch scientists talking about the work that was being published in his journal that month. And then the other approach that he took that was is a very sort of a fostering or nurturing approach, is that, instead of kind of his technique for raising the stature of his journal being to say no to a lot of people, which is one way to do it, is just to be extremely discriminating. Paul did that, and he had to do it, but it really felt like the way he drove it forward was by going out and attracting the people who he thought were doing the most exciting work, and saying to them, listen, you should publish in my journal. We know each other. Everybody likes Paul. Everybody's friend. So, come publish in my journal. It'll be great for you. It'll be good for the journal. People did it. They responded to him, and as a result, he's doubled the impact factor over a couple of years, which means that he's taken his journal from being one that people cited at a reasonable level to being one of the strongest journals in the field, all through this positive force of attracting the best scientists to work with him. Another person who's been a real inspiration, in fact, to I think pretty much everybody born in Canada, he's kind of a model, is John Polanyi, who's a professor at the University of Toronto. John won the Nobel Prize in 1986 for his invention of a new field in concert with a few others. It's a field of research in chemistry called reaction dynamics. And essentially John and a few other colleagues who shared the 1986 Nobel Prize with him won it for providing a much more detailed understanding of how chemical reactions occur. And John in particular advanced the method of infrared chemiluminescence, where he's able to essentially see the energy that was coming out of a chemical reaction in real time and use its spectral properties to see where the energy was going, to do kind of a complete balance or a complete accounting for these reactions. And since then, because that was in 1956 that John made those discoveries, though the Nobel Prize didn't come until 1986. But since then, and prior to then as well, he's started new efforts in new fields and new endeavors entirely. One of the most exciting things that he does now is surface-aligned photochemistry, where he recognizes that the angle with which two molecules interact with each other will drive the kind of chemical reaction that occurs, what the products will be. And so he takes advantages of having a surface of atoms that's extremely well controlled, the kinds of things you can measure with your scanning tunneling microscope, the kind of things on which you can move around molecules using your scanning tunneling microscope tip. And he uses it to poise molecules in specific orientations and then bring in other molecules at specific angles. And so he's able to discover and understand better the influence of the geometry, the relationships between molecules in space and an angle, and how that actually drives reactions. And so it's some incredibly deep science that says we want to understand these reactions at the deepest level. Another way in which he's really inspiring, though, that goes beyond the science that he does, he was, as I was saying, a hero to school children growing up in Canada, not somewhat small country in terms of population, a countable number of Canadians who won the Nobel Prize who are still working in Canada today, of whom John is one. And John decided to use this well-earned platform to be very vocal on other subjects as well as to influence public policy and really public thinking. He's really a scientist for peace, somebody who's spoken out and who has a resonance nationally and internationally on the subjects of peace, on how we should think about nuclear armaments, nuclear energy. And I think he really takes the approach that it's certainly something that scientists are entitled to do. In fact, it's almost something that scientists are required to do, is to use their platform and their deep understanding of the technical or scientific issues that underlie what they're speaking about, that underlie a lot of important questions in public policy, and to be vocal about them, that is really their duty. And John inspires a lot of people that way. Another scientist who has inspired many in the field of nanotechnology, including those particularly passionate about working on problems in energy, is Michael Gretzel, who's at École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland. And Michael is acknowledged as the inventor of the first efficient dye-sensitized solar cells. These are essentially the first solar cells that showed promise for being very low in cost, and therefore got people excited about the concept of integrating solar cells into somebody's backpack. But there's also some fascinating chemistry at work, some fascinating inorganic chemistry, and Michael managed to make that field and adding photons into it and harvesting energy with it into an incredibly exciting one. And what I find so striking about Michael Gretzel's work today is that, like the other people that I mentioned, I mean, he's so distinguished on the world stage. He's won the Millennium Prize for Finland. He could easily rest on his laurels if he wanted to. But in fact, he has exactly the opposite approach. The science that he does today, for one thing, it's prolific, but he just studies in incredible depth and detail every element of the system that he invented. And so he's had these large impact papers that have really influenced people, and then by teaming with researchers all around the world, and Israel and in Japan and in Korea, and we collaborate with my group, people in the US, people around the world get to participate in this community of research surrounding understanding the fascinating chemistry and physics that underlie this new class of devices that Michael and his team invented. Of course, I've spoken about commercialization of nanotechnology. Shane has spoken quite a bit about how nanotechnology actually gets done within universities, but within large companies, there's a great deal of a very exciting activity. In fact, in many respects, large companies have an advantage. They are already product companies today. They already know how to manufacture and ship and be profitable, one hopes. But in addition to that, in their research arms, they have the potential to look down the road 5, 10, 15 years into the future, figure out where they have strengths and where there are needs available. And so DuPont, for example, is one company that's done some fascinating work there were actually, an academically very prestigious paper published by a DuPont group on sorting carbon nanotubes with the aid of DNA, where different sequences of DNA could essentially recognize different classes of carbon nanotubes. Something that has since had a lot of direct impact and practical importance is DuPont's realization of flexible substrates for photovoltaics. If the real promise of solar cells based on roll-to-roll processing, essentially printing solar cells the way we print newspapers, is to be achieved, then it will be on flexible substrates that are reliable, cost-effective, in some cases optically transparent. And people at DuPont have really shown leadership in that very important field. IBM research is a fascinating place where many discoveries from the last decades have occurred. Of course, the researchers who developed the scanning tunneling microscope, Bitting and Rohr, were at IBM Zurich. There has been some of the most important work on carbon nanotubes and graphene, especially in the context of electronics. The electronic properties of these materials have been advanced by Fedun Navouris at IBM Research. And this is where one of IBM's great advantages is so obvious, that especially in the field of electronics, there's a pathway there to figure out how to take these upstream discoveries, this R&D, and transform it into reliable, robust manufacturable devices, which is really one of the central challenges of that area. And it's an area where IBM has just recently shown some very striking results, really integrating these new classes of materials, these new concepts onto silicon. In the field of photovoltaics, they've also shown leadership with David Mitzi's work on looking at new earth-abundant materials that can be processed in a very cost-effective way and turned into energy harvesting materials. And as we've discussed throughout the course, Chris Murray's work on the colloidal quantum dots and building superlattice materials and devices out of them has come out of IBM Research, as has Yuri Vlasov's work that we discussed in the context of silicon photonics, trying to put light onto a chip. Intel is kind of another animal entirely. There's this very well-defined, very focused enterprise within Intel on just bringing us the next generation of integrated circuits as they've done so successfully for decades. And so the FinFET that we spoke about earlier came directly out of Intel, out of research done there, aimed at figuring out how to wrap a gate electrode around the channel, essentially, of a transistor in order to allow scaling to smaller and smaller dimensions. And speaking of which, that scaling itself is something in which Intel has always been very much in the lead in figuring out how we will get to that next lithographic node, figuring out how we can extend the incredibly long lifetime of photolithography down to smaller and smaller length scales. I hope that you've enjoyed this kind of perspective on how research gets done, research that happens in university labs, research that gets spun out from there, how academics make an impression on each other through their publications in interdisciplinary journals, how they talk to each other through those venues, and how research happens within big companies. You can see that the research and the transformation into innovation, into products, it's really an ecosystem. It's got the incredibly important foundations of basic research, without which we would not understand how to talk to the nano world, how to measure the nano world, how to think about what materials we can build, what's possible. And then it has researchers who kind of reach upstream and who find new materials, new concepts, and try to translate them into things that are practical. And then those that are willing to take that even further, take it into companies and transform it robustly into products. And it's because this ecosystem exists, it's because there are researchers who are passionate at every stage within that ecosystem, that nanotechnology really is starting to have an impact on our lives, a growing impact with every day.